look at the inflationary position, we also, as you put it, have to balance because we are in a conundrum at the same time. We want to spur growth. How do you do that? How do you, at the same, while meeting those fiscal targets, what actions can we take to also spur growth at the same time?
Well, there are constraints that we can work on with our economy, right? We can work on crime, right? That is crime. Crime has an impact of about 5% on GDP. And this is an area that we need to work through in terms of what we know is we have the consensus monitoring oversight committee that is focused on quite a few areas. There is a social programs that we must focus on. There is the legislation that we must focus on. Jamaica has been in a low consequence environment for years in that if you do the crime, you're not doing the time. So Jamaica has to focus on the legislation to deal with that. Those include the unexplained wealth. There's a lot of money being made in this country and people cannot explain it. So unexplained wealth has to be dealt with. We also have to deal with the Bail Act. We see people who are committing repeated acts and are getting bail, right? There is in terms of, there are several of them, and I can speak to them right off the bat in terms of legislation that needs to be dealt with. There is a Firearms Act. The maximum sentence in the parish courts for a legal possession of a firearm is 3 to 5 years. So the legislative environment has to be dealt with so that we can create an environment where there are consequences for those who commit the crime, and therefore they'll be disincentivized before they commit that crime. We have to deal with social programs. We know that the spend on social programs has not been effective as borne out by the Qtly study. So we have to really ensure that we have a well-coordinated effort into these marginalized communities, right, that produce most of our crime. 20 communities in Jamaica produce 70% of our major crimes. So we need to focus on these communities. I mean, for too long, the basic services and social programs have been lacking in these communities. This is where Jamaica needs to pay some attention to, right? So crime is one. Energy costs is another that we have to address, right? Energy costs are just much too high. We're like in the top 5 in the world in terms of energy costs, and it impacts the cost of doing business. So this is another policy area that must be addressed in terms of us going forward. So there are other areas that we can work on to really shift. So you don't have to just work on the top line. You can work on those things that make business easier to do in Jamaica. That will increase investments in Jamaica. You know what I mean? Because it will be much more of a more favorable investment destination if we're to cover crime, energy costs, and other areas that we can discuss. But I just give you those two as an example. Yeah? Education is another key thing. And you're getting me going here now, because look at now, 63% of our workforce is untrained. Okay, let me just start from the top line. There are 2 million people that are eligible for the workforce. Of that, 1.3 million have made themselves available for the workforce. There are 767,000 people that are outside of the workforce, right? 215,000 of those are in school, full-time or part-time. That means there are 500,000 people who are eligible for the workforce that are outside the workforce. And remember, when you include what you include in the workforce, is even windshield wipers, the little vendor on the street, they're included in the workforce. There are 500,000 people who are eligible for the workforce that are on the streets, and inclusive of that is the unattached youth, at-risk youth. Of that 1.3 million that have made themselves available now, so we leave that out, 1.2 million are in the workforce, are working. 63% of those people have no certification, zero. right? Zero certification. And therefore, human capital development becomes very, very important if we're going to turn this around. When we look at the education spend, we see where early childhood expenditure on early childhood is lower than our peers. But when we look at the spend on education for primary and secondary and tertiary school, we are on par with our peers. It's not that we're not spending the money on education. We're not getting the value, and it's because we're not giving the children the foundation in the early childhood education. And therefore, they just pass through the system, and then they're untrainable, and then you have 63% of your workforce, 767,000 people that are not trained. These are the areas we need to focus on if we're going to turn this around. Now, if I am an investor and I'm coming into Jamaica, and you have an untrained workforce, you have high crime, you have high energy costs, I'm going to think twice.